By show of hands, how many parents of grown children are in the room? I can see y'all. How many of y'all had dreams and plans of exactly how you wanted your kids to turn out? And how many of y'all got it right? And one more question. How successful were your parents in getting you to become exactly who they wanted you to be? No one? Yes. It's a pretty common phenomenon amongst parents, except most times our kids have their own agenda. Yet the very first thing we do, even before our babies are born, is start dreaming and planning and expecting this future for them, which ultimately may not be in alignment with theirs. Some of us parents arrive on day one of parenting with our bags and this crazy notion that we know our children, we know everything about our kids. We want them to grow up, take over the family business, find a nice girl or guy to marry, live in a 4-bedroom rancher with a white picket fence, have 3 grandbabies, 2 boys and a girl, and then 2 pet golden retrievers because, well, we love golden retrievers, don't we? Take my dad, for example. Growing up in Nigeria, my dad had my entire life all planned out. He knew exactly who I was going to become, down to who I would marry. He wanted me to become a pharmacist, find a nice young man to marry, have multiple children, and settle down in that order. So while my dad was right about providing everything I needed to thrive as a child, when it came to my sexuality, though, he missed the mark. My dad assumed I am straight. Anyone else in the room? You'd think I would have learned a thing or two with that experience. When I grew up and started having children, I did exactly what my parents had done. I assumed I knew who my kids were, down to who they would become. When my youngest child was born, I assumed he would like musical instruments because his older siblings play musical instruments. Why not? So I bought him a very expensive electric guitar. Y'all, he's never touched that thing, as he refers to it. My second child was born preferring to use his left hand. Regardless of everything my ex-husband did to try to dissuade him from doing it, today, at nearly 23, the young man is still left-handed. When my eldest child was born, we assigned the baby a male sex at birth. And he was raised and socialized as a boy. Now, let me tell you something about Nigeria and Igbo land where I'm from. Having a first-born male child is the most desired outcome of every marriage. And so my ex-husband in particular was over the moon at the birth of his first son. Alas, the kid had their own agenda, and boy, was I in for a shock. Now, let me confess, though, as a child was growing up, I kind of had my suspicions, so I assigned a non-heterosexual identity. And let me tell you, as I was doing that, nothing could have prepared me for the summer of 2020, when I found out that they were non-binary and used they, them pronouns. As I was still trying to wrap my head around that, Christmas Day 2021, I get a phone call. 3 words were said. Mom, I'm trans. So what happens when your children don't turn out the way you planned, as is often the case? What happens when your child is not who you thought they were, especially with regards to their gender and or sexual identity? So let's take a little trip down to that department, shall we? Sexuality or sexual identity is defined as a person's identity in regards to genders or gender that they are attracted to. That actually starts around early infancy. Did you know that? Gender identity, on the other hand, is a person's deep and internal sense of who we are as male or female, somewhere in between, a combination of both or neither. And might I remind you that a lot of children, when they are born, they are assigned a male or female gender by their parents. That is not a gender identity. Up to 1.7% or 2% of the world's population are born intersex, meaning a combination or a varying combination of both male and female chromosomes, internal sex organs, or external genitalia. Self-recognition as a boy or a girl starts around age 2. But by the age of 4, most children are pretty solid about their gender identity. Gender roles, on the other hand, are fake societal rules that have been given to us as to how we should act or behave based on a binary male or female gender assignment. Now, let me tell you something. That is a performance of sorts. That is not gender identity. For some children, their gender identity is in alignment with their gender assigned at birth. But for some others, there's an incongruence, meaning a mismatch between the gender they were assigned at birth and their true gender identity. And that, my friends, is where the misalignment between your assumption as parents and their reality comes in. Sex and gender identity are characteristic traits, much like eye color, handedness, and body development. Can't really teach it to someone, and you can't assume it, not even by the best of parents. And so just in case you're thinking Dr. Lulu is making all this stuff up, let's take a look at some numbers, shall we? That first slide shows us that adults who self-identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or something other than heterosexual, as at 2021, have doubled in percentage from 3.5 in 2012 to 7.1 in 2021. The second slide shows us that up to 30% of our young adults today identify as LGBTQ+. The next slide shows us that 1 in 5 young adults globally do not identify as straight. What is that? 20%? The next slide, almost identical to that one, shows us that Gen Zers and millennials identify as transgender, non-binary, 4% and 2% respectively. And that's not a few people. And the last slide there shows us that 5% of young adults globally identify as a different gender than they were assigned as birth. This particular slide here, though, is an interesting one. It tells us that 42%, more than 40% of US adults know someone who is transgender or uses gender-neutral pronouns. And so I'm going to ask by show of hands again, how many in the room know someone who's transgender or uses gender-neutral pronouns? Yeah, almost everybody. Now, this slide, though, is the reason I do the work that I do. 45% of LGBTQ+ youth seriously considered suicide in the past 12 months, according to the Trevor Project. But look at that one. 14% actually did attempt suicide. And that number, when you extrapolate it, 1 in 5 of those were transgender or non-binary. And we can almost argue that those numbers are probably higher. There's a high stigma about raising your hands today to identify in the LGBT+ community. So what can we do about it? Now, I'll tell you, after I had children, I realized I knew diddly squat about who my kids were or who they were going to be. In truth, my children came to me as strangers. Our children come to us as complete strangers. And what do you do when you meet a stranger? You learn everything about them from them. You don't go inserting your thoughts and belief systems and accepting them to conform. No. So I learned on the job. I learned I had been raised to believe that parents know everything about their kids, that parenting is about being right, being in control, or having the last word. That strategy, my friends, raises children who in turn feel a need to perform so as not to disappoint you. And for the LGBT+ community, not to be their whole and complete selves so as not to let you down. Now I know that parenting is quite the opposite. The only way I could become the parents that my children needed, the only way I can become the parents my children need, was to lean in and let them lead. Letting the children lead, I realized that to do that, I had to become a student. I had to let them teach me. Today, I'm learning everything about the LGBTQ+ and the transgender community because my child is transgender. I'm learning to be accepting and supportive rather than to be right. I'm learning to listen and affirm her rather than assume I know her. I'm learning to unlearn all my conditioning and open up my heart to her full and radical acceptance, even if it means agitating the governor of Texas. And I ask you to join me in doing that. And to do that, we must, like I said, approach children and parenting with curiosity. Now, it will require equal parts courage, patience, humility, and vulnerability to pull that off. So next time, before you start planning and dreaming and expecting this crazy, wild future for your children, remember that they are full and whole, complete persons, and they will become whomever they were meant to be. So you might as well let them lead. After all, it is their life. Thank you.